Jambo Rafiki, I'm Elizabeth from Kasiwa82 and I hope you are doing really well. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. On Tuesdays, I drop videos talking about all things books, and on Fridays, videos about journaling and kind of all things creative play. So today, I'm going to talk about my most disappointing reads of 2020. They are not necessarily the worst books I read last year. They're also not necessarily the books I DNF'd the most. These are just the ones I had such high expectations for and were sorely disappointed. So I have 10 books to talk about today, and I'm just going to go through them quickly. The first on the list is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Now, this is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. That trilogy is one that I enjoyed. I enjoyed both the books as well as the movies made out of them. And I was really excited about the potential of this one because it takes Coriolanus Snow, the arch villain, if you will, in the trilogy, and we go back in time meeting him as a teenager, and I think it's during the 10th Hunger Games. So we get a flashback to the world as it looked a long time ago, and so that we who have read the original trilogy can do a comparison. I thought it was a pretty audacious move by Suzanne Collins to go ahead and tell the story from the POV of Snow, because this is someone we all love to detest, and it started out really well. Unfortunately, there was not much added to the story. The idea of, okay, so there were poor kids in the capital, who cares? The fact that none of the characters are well fleshed out, they are all basic cardboard cutouts that the author is moving back and forth across the pages. And really there's a whole bunch of names, and other than the names being amusing, I'm not sure who all these people were because we didn't really know, so don't care. Now, clearly the lead female character, we know there's going to be an instant love there, and I was disappointed when that actually came to fruition. The dialogue is trite, the plot is kind of all over the map. I was sorely disappointed in this installment, and I DNF'd it, I think, about 60% through. I listened to the audiobook, which is wonderfully narrated by Santino Fontana, and if not for that narration, I probably would have ended this book or DNF'd this much sooner. Such a disappointment. Sometimes I guess, the trilogy stands alone. We don't need to go back and look at other things. Yeah, a big disappointment for me. Next on the list is an author whose work I gave 5 stars to, and so again, my expectations were really high going into this one. And this is Devolution, a first account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre by Max Brooks. I listened to the audio, which has got a full cast narration, and the audio is actually really good. I finished this book, but it just did not have the magic that World War Z did. If you are interested in Max Brooks, go back and look at World War Z. The audiobook narration of that story is fantastic. 5 stars. The movie is also pretty good. However, this installment, there was something missing. So the premise of the story is Rainier has erupted, and basically we're coming back and trying to find survivors from that particular eruption. And the story unfolds from the journal of a person who was in this kind of eco-friendly, very technological savvy community who didn't even have a hammer between them. Don't get me started. Anyways, this is an example of a story that I just expected to love. I expected to love this story because it's about Sasquatch. It's there in the title. And it's what do people do when an apocalypse happens and you rely on yourselves. The pacing is all over the map. I really liked the idea of, we are hearing the story through first-hand accounts of the journal a woman keeps who lives in that particular enclave. And then kind of researchers and scientists talking about the history of Sasquatch sightings and just the history in general of these kind of mythological creatures and how human stories have evolved to tell those stories. That is something I really enjoyed. But the book in itself, all over the map, not enough, didn't really care. Just as in with the Hunger Games, the Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes, people, in that case, kids are dying, and I yawned. In this case, people are dying, and I just didn't really care. However, would I watch a movie adaptation of this? Of course I would. But I just didn't really enjoy the book. I gave this one 2 stars. I finished it, so there's something to be said for that, but not really. Compared to what I was expecting, this was a huge letdown. Third on this list, and again, this list is in no particular order other than just as I was going through my Goodreads, kind of how they came up in my order there, is 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. Now, I listened to the audiobook of this one, which was really well narrated by Graham Halstead, and I come to find out as I went back to look at my review of this book, it's the first in a series, which I will not be continuing with. So the premise is great. This is the story of a bookseller, and he basically writes a blog post about 8 perfect murders. And what he does is he goes back through literature and reviews 8 books that tell murder stories really well. So, for example, Agatha Christie's ABC Murders, Donna Tartt's The Secret History, Patricia Highsmith's I think it's Stranger on a Train. So there's 8 of these, and I think though that was a great premise. And so what happens is he writes this blog post, he forgets about it, and then one day an FBI agent walks into his bookstore because murders have been taking place following the format that he wrote this blog post in, right? The order in which he wrote the blog post. I really loved the Beacon Hill, Boston. I'm in the Boston area, so I really love the setting of this. I also kind of love the idea, I love that it was an ode to all things murder mysteries, but the story itself is ridiculous. These characters are incredibly not well fleshed out. They do things that make no sense at all. And one of them is an FBI agent. I mean, that woman, you expect more from her, right? She's an FBI. I don't even understand the choices that they made. It made no sense to me. Their motivations were suspect at best. I was bored throughout. And there's some interesting twists that take place, but I think I would have spent my time more effectively if I had DNF'd this book because I got to the end and actually gone ahead and read the 8 books that he highlights, because I think, and I might do that anyway, I might go back and actually read the 8 books that he highlights there, because that would be, I think, a more interesting project than actually reading this particular book. So, another disappointment. I did finish it. I think I ended up giving it 2 stars. Fourth on the list, I have only myself to blame for this, right? It's kind of like a dysfunctional relationship. You walk away, you know it's bad for you, and yet you keep going back. This is Dark Sacred Night by Michael Connelly. It's the second outing of Renee Ballard, and I think the 21st of Harry Bosch. Now, I love Michael Connelly's early writings. I mean, his early Bosch are some of the most enjoyable reads, police procedurals that I have read ever. He gets long in the tooth, he jumps the shark. I mean, at some point I was like, this is really bad, and I stopped reading those. And I've gone through and read some of his other ones, the James McAvoy outing and the Renee Ballard outing. And I really, really did not like Renee Ballard. I mean, he does not write women well at all. And just the premise is ridiculous. So this particular story has got these 2 characters from these 2 different storylines kind of intersecting, Bosch and Ballard. And there's a 15-year-old who was a girl killed, her body is found in the dumpster. Bosch is trying to solve this murder. There's a connection to an older case for him, and it's these 2 working together. The pacing is bad, the dialogue is bad. Really, I don't even understand how I got to the end of this book, other than it is really well narrated. So the audio narration by Christine Larkin and Titus Welliver are really, really great. And I think that's really the reason I got to the end of this book. I really enjoyed the narration, and I was listening to it while I was walking. So, I'm far from home. I'll get to the next chapter. The resolution, I don't even remember at this point, so didn't care. 2 stars for that, just because I got to the end of this. Number 5 on the list, this broke my heart, is The Seventh Scroll by Wilbur Smith. So this is the second book in the Ancient Egypt. I think it's 5 books in the series now. I don't even know how to describe how disappointed I was with this one. The first outing, The River Gods, is one that I really enjoyed. I read when I was younger, and I reread a couple of years ago. So all of these books were pretty much read during the pandemic, right? So COVID had hit, we were hearing about lockdowns, and I thought, all right, we've got a lockdown coming in or coming up. You know, a tomb mystery set in ancient Egypt sounded like exactly what the doctor ordered. I don't know what, I do not know. I mean, that this is the same writer makes no sense to me. The writing is bad. The dialogue is ridiculous. The people are not well fleshed out. We of course have a beautiful Egyptologist, and I know the fact that the Titus, who's the person, the original eunuch in the original River Gods, must have been rolling in his grave that this is the story that he follows up with from that really well done Egyptology story. This one, I just didn't care. The writing wasn't good enough. And the fact that unlike the first book, River Gods, which is set in, olden times, right? It's a historical novel. This one is kind of set in present day. So there's no reason for some of the sexist stuff that happens in the story and how people are talking. I just didn't understand that. So there are 5 books in this series. I went and took a look at some of the other ones just to see. I DNF'd this one about halfway through, and that's saying something, because I used to read so much Wilbur Smith. I have read a lot of his stuff when I was younger. I was really kind of saving to savor this ancient Egypt pentalogy, I think it is now. And I've been really reluctant to move forward. I'm kind of gun shy on this one. So if you've read any further in his series and it gets better, please do let me know. This was such a disappointment. I mean, this in some ways is one of the most disappointing books on this list, because I just was expecting to just get taken along on an adventure ride set in Egypt. Did not happen. Number 6. Harkening back to the first book I talked about, I think authors, when they write a great trilogy that is well received, should leave well alone. This one is Serpentine by Philip Pullman. So his Dark Materials, that trilogy is one that I really enjoyed. It's a YA series, and so on this list it's the second YA. The first one is the Suzanne Collins, The Hunger Games. So this is a YA series, so I'm not expecting to love it, right? In the way I would love maybe a really well-written adult book. But I really enjoyed his Dark Materials. That trilogy is really good. It's really good on audio as well. The HBO adaptation is good. It's not great. But, I was sucked in by the idea of spending a little bit more time with Lyra and Pantalaimon. And I really enjoy those 2 characters. I'm also not liking the reboot. So his original Dark Materials are 3 books, and then he's writing another trilogy that's kind of a prequel to the whole Dark Materials, and then the second 2 books are like Lyra is now in her early 20s, as opposed to we meet her when she's a tween, kind of teen area. So this particular book, Serpentine, is a really, really short story. I mean, it's really short, and it's kind of in between the 2. So his Dark Materials is done, and it's kind of a branch between that trilogy and this new set of books that he's writing. Honestly, unless you're a completist, I wouldn't bother. It's a very expensive book as well, and I just didn't understand. It was boring. I didn't care about what was happening, and I happened to love these 2 characters. I just was like, what's the point of this story? Why has Pullman given us this story? Now, at the end, he does say that what he did was write this really short story as something that could be auctioned at for some fundraiser. So that makes sense. I don't know why people decided that, okay, we'll take that particular book and go ahead and publish it for the general readership. Do not get me started. So, I will say, however, that the illustrations in this book are wonderful. The illustrator is Tom Duxbury, and they kind of look like old Japanese woodcuts, so I'm hoping that all the proceeds for this book went to that illustrator. But in terms of the story, it didn't move anything forward. It was boring, it was dull, it was dry. Would not recommend, right? Highly disappointed. When I find a series or a trilogy or anything that I love, I'm expecting that same caliber of work. And Pullman does not deliver in this one. And actually his second trilogy, or the newer trilogy, not a fan of that really either. Okay, number 7. I don't know why I do this, but sometimes I feel like I'm a completist when I don't need to be. I DNF books fairly frequently these days. I didn't used to, and I blame those Catholic nuns for that. But over the course of my reading career, I have started DNFing books more often, and I don't know why sometimes I forget. This is Holy Sister by Mark Lawrence. It's the third book in the Book of the Ancestors. Now, a YA fantasy, again, I think I picked this one up because I had read the first two. I enjoyed them. They were YA. I have complaints about the fact that there's a lot of, okay, what's it about? Assassin nuns. That's what sucked me in. It's a book about assassin nuns. You know, there needs to be more. Just needs to be more. Assassin nuns, books, movies, anything. I'm all in. So this is a YA series that follows Nana Gray. We meet her as a really young girl. She's grabbed and taken into the convent, and she's now in a convent full of assassin nuns. It's a fantasy series. It's YA. So you're expecting the plot to be very plot heavy, right? It is. It's a very plot heavy book, the whole trilogy. And this book in particular, there's a lot of bloodshed. There's a lot of mean girls kind of action taking place in this trilogy, but it's really about a girl coming to terms with who she is and figuring out her place in the world. The world building is good. I like some of the dynamics between the girls themselves as well as the older nuns, but there's something about a YA book that has a 9-year-old that outsmarts every adult that just has me scratching my head. Now, there is so much blood and death in this story, the whole trilogy, and yet it's an incredibly chaste book. So that was kind of an odd thing, right? It's like we can't have any sexual innuendos of any kind. However, we're going to have blood, gore, and people dying all over the place. My other complaint with this, and this tends to be the true for most YA for me, I find, is the stakes are really high, but they are always easily resolved. And so there's something strange about that. If you're going to have high stakes, they need to be real consequences to those stakes, and there just isn't here. This particular one finishes up the series. It does end things nicely. It ties up all the bows. It is the weakest in the trilogy. I was disappointed. If you have any recommendations for assassin nuns that do really cool things and the writing is good, please, I'm all in. Let me know. Okay, number 8 was a DNF. It's Stephen King. I love King. You know this. I've had a love-hate relationship with King, but I'm just always like, he tends to create worlds that are interesting, characters that are well fleshed out. And this one is Sleeping Beauties. Now, he co-writes it with his son, Owen King, and that could have been the problem. It definitely comes across that Owen King is more of an ideas guy. Like the themes he wants to explore in his books, I think, are really great, but they don't really work well in the format that, in my opinion, he's working with his father. So this particular one, the world is kind of a dystopian world of sorts, in that there are these women fall asleep and they wake up and they're covered in mold. And if you take the mold or whatever the casing is away from them, bad things happen, right? They become I don't want to say the word rabid, but they do. They become kind of this crazy people that are out to kill everybody. Interesting idea. I was expecting to get sucked into the story and love it, because that's one of the things about King for me, is like Stephen King, is that I start reading a book and I am immediately immersed in the plot, and I cannot wait to see what happens. Didn't really work. This co-authoring he's doing with his sons, I'm not a big fan of this one in particular. I DNF'd this one 21% of the way through. It is well read by Marin, Ireland, but I was really disappointed. I always look forward to just getting sucked in and getting lost in this world, and this one did not do it for me. Number 9 is The Story Hour by Thrity Umrigar. Again, an author I love. I have read her book, The Space Between Us. If you have not read that book, highly recommend it. She explores really interesting themes in terms of class and gender and just economics and women in particular. How she explores relationships between women is one of the things that I think she is superb at. This book, however, nowhere near as good. Nowhere. So the premise is we have Lakshmi, who is a South Asian woman. The whole thing is set in the United States. Lakshmi is a South Asian woman who tries to commit suicide. She is taken to the hospital, she's revived, and she's set up with this therapist called Maggie. Now, Maggie is an African American who is married to a Bengali man. Okay? So many issues I have with this book. I'm not going to go into all of them here. My Goodreads link is always down below. If you want to take a look at more things I have to say about this book, please go look at that. But a couple of things that I'd like to highlight here. One, the story is just not really well written. In terms of, well, let me rephrase that. The writing is really good, but what happens with these characters is just kind of all over the place. So you introduce Maggie, who is an African American married to a Bengali man, and she has been to visit his family in Bengal. There is no other race conversation in this book other than when Lakshmi first meets Maggie, that she is black, comes up, okay? But other than that, there is no conversation of race. And to me, if you're not going to talk about race, there is no need to make Maggie African American, and certainly no need to have her married to a Bengali man. Because let me tell you, as a South Asian, there are so many things to talk about, and none of them get explored here at all. Two, Maggie's a therapist. What she does is just, I just don't even understand. She's trained to be a therapist. This is what her training is. She decides to blur the lines between professional and personal, and she does things that just don't make any sense. So that was the other thing. I'm looking, while she's doing this stuff, I'm like, wait a minute, what? This is the therapist. What is she doing here? So a missed opportunity for me by the author to really explore what it is like to be a woman who feels stifled in a relationship, who has no way out, who is depressed and needs help, working with a therapist. And there are issues of immigrants in the U.S. to talk about, which don't really get explored very well. There are race issues to talk about that don't get explored very well. There are class issues that don't get explored very well. I just was like, I don't understand what was the point of this story. Many others have loved this book, and I think it just could be, as a South Asian, I wanted more. I wanted more of these themes that I'm talking about explored, and they just were not. It was all kind of surface level or not discussed at all. Do not recommend this one. I was so disappointed. However, I will say, if you would like to try her work, start with The Space Between Us. And you know what? As a non-South Asian, it might work better for you. If you're a South Asian and have read this book and loved it, I would love to be engaged with you in the comments down below, because, as I said, I just have a whole bunch of issues with this one. Now, I listened to the audio. It is really well narrated by Sneha Mathan, and if you're going to listen to this on audio, I would highly recommend that. And finally, we have another YA. Neil Shusterman's The Toll, which is the final book in the Arc of the Scythe trilogy. Again, I really enjoy the premise of this. We are living in a world where death has been solved. Using technology and medical science, people don't die anymore. So, well, that creates a burden on the planet. So what happens? And there's a system put in place that there are people called scythes who go around and on a schedule have a list of people that they kill to keep the population down. It is random, supposed to be. So the first two books kind of talk about that world. I can't really talk much about this one without spoilers, but let me just say that the ending of the second book, if we had ended there, I would have been happy. What we did is the ending of the second book doesn't happen really the way it's set up. I'm trying not to spoil anything here. And I don't understand the point. These characters are not believable. There's no fleshing out of these characters. The pacing is all over the map. There's a huge bunch of action scenes, and then nothing happens for a very long time. I missed the voice of the Thunderhead. And if you've read the first two books, you know what I'm talking about. It's this AI, and I just really, in the first book, he was a little bit there, but the second book particularly, I really liked that voice. How does the AI talk about or think about or look at humans, right? The other thing is, I really missed Grayson. I mean, I thought he was such an interesting character in the second book, and there's nothing there here. Okay, it's YA, so the pacing is really fast. It's a really quick read, which is why I got to the end of it. I did like that there was an option that the Thunderhead had put in place just in case humans behaved in the way that we know humans will behave. There's not much diversity on the page. We have kind of this one character who shows up and it's almost like there's this exposition of you know, a different kind of sexuality, and I'm like, dude, either do or don't do, right? Don't try. This was kind of the worst of all worlds. So there are also a lot of people in this story that don't really add anything to the story. So they're there, they're introduced to us, but they don't really have any motivation or drive that really move the story forward in any meaningful way. So I'm like, why are we meeting all these people if they're not going to matter to us? Cut, right? This is my big thing is cut. Snip anything out that's not adding to the story. Anyway, so I finished it. Again, my completest thing there. This was disappointing because I was expecting that this was going to be a culmination of some of the themes Schusterman talks and broaches in the first two books and does not do here at all. Again, a very much loved trilogy, a big disappointment for me. So those are the 10 most disappointing books I read in 2020. I'd love to hear what yours were. If you read any of these and have similar opinions or don't, that you disagree, would love to engage with you in the comments down below. Let me know what you're reading, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.